So I was invited to the campus to give a speech on protecting women's sports. But after my speech, I was ambushed by a mob of people within the LGBTQ community.
LGBTQI plus kids are resilient. They are fierce. They fight back.
They attacked me, pushed me into a room to where I was barricaded for 3 hours.
They're not going anywhere.
And to where they demanded money from me if I wanted to make it home safely.
Tell her to pay us. Tell her to pay us and then she could go. $10 each.
And we have their back.
Of course they resort to violence because they don't have science on their side. They don't have reason. They don't have common sense. They don't have the truth. They were telling me that they wanted to hurt me, that they wanted to put me in danger. They wanted to kill me.
This administration has their back.
All of this for just saying men should not compete and change in a locker room with women.
And you give a general assurance to Posey Parker and to Mara Davidson and to all the other women assaulted in Albert Park on Saturday that given the huge amount of video evidence, police will investigate and prosecute whomever is responsible for any assault that day.
Those are decisions for the Commissioner of Police.
The incredible thing has been the behavior of the police here today.
The cops didn't ride your dick.
They don't want to do anything.
Did you just say he came here to incite violence by forcing his opinion on people?
Yes.
Incredible. The state of Canada right now. You'd think that the cult of transgenderism had hired their own police force.
When you
What
talk
is
to
wrong
someone
with you?
and scream at someone and
He
put
didn't
your
scream
face...
at all.
Yes,
he
did.
didn't.
Idiot! Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you!
Inciting violence by standing there with his sign. Is that really your position?
Fuck you!
Okay, sir, we're done with this conversation.
Yeah, I thought so.
Oh, look, a woman's titty. Fuck you. Excuse me. Stop. Do it. Stop. What? Ah, he's touching me. He hit me. He hit me.
Come to the Savior. Turn away from the Father of lies. Turn away from the Father of lies.
Children cannot consent! More coffee on me! More coffee! More coffee! Get out! Get the fuck out of here! Get off me! Oh, look at that! Look at! Oh my God! Look at that! Y'all see me? Y'all see her throw water on me, and y'all do nothing. Look at her. So she can just throw water on me. Imagine if I threw water on you, officer. Why, Petey? You see the coffee? You see the throwing on me? What are you gonna do? You don't do a damn thing about it because you protect groomers.
In Nashville yesterday, there was an actual insurrection when screaming rioters stormed the Tennessee state capitol. At one point, these rioters mocked the 6 Christians, including 3 children, who were just murdered this week by a trans terrorist in Tennessee. They held up 7 fingers for 7 victims, meaning the killer, in their view, was one of the victims.
It's shameful. It is disturbing.
Throw water on me. They assault me. You got the cops here. They don't do anything about it.
And our hearts go out to the trans community.
They just spit on me.
As they are under attack right now.
They just literally spit on me.
The great reset is high. Join us. A new world awaits. You will own nothing and be happy. We can build back better. digital utopia. Welcome to the new normal.
Hello and welcome to MilkBarTV Podcast. My name is Nathan from MilkBarTV, and thank you for joining me for this episode of the podcast. There was this question about what would happen as the pandemic starts to wind down, what would fill that vacuum of the kind of central political conflict within the culture wars. And going by the past month, the answer seems pretty clear that it's going to be this whole gender conflict, this clash between trans rights activists and the women's rights movement. It's been a crazy past month. Most notably in the Southern Hemisphere was the tour with Posie Parker, a prominent British women's rights activist, where she came to do this speaking tour and hold multiple rallies in different cities. And she made a lot of headlines, to say the least, most notably in New Zealand, where she turned up for her rally. And pretty much what happened was she was mobbed by these trans rights activists, and it was violent. It was really ugly. You can look up footage. People were punched and attacked, including Posie Parker. And watching the footage, it's a miracle that she got out of there unscathed. Someone who's been on the front line when it comes to this whole fight is Sall Grover. If you're Australian, you might be aware of her work from last year, where she became a mother and she gave birth, and she was filling out her Medicare forms, which is kind of like the Australian equivalent of like public health insurance cover. And she got to where, you should fill out the mother's name, and it said birthing parent. We've all kind of started to unfortunately grow accustomed of these crazy kind of like titles that you got to put in, especially when it comes to government forms. And for her, she took the photo and put on Twitter of like, how ridiculous is this, birthing parent, and expecting nothing to come of it, and pretty much went viral. And there was enough outrage that it made the news. And then the crazy thing was the minister who had the power to actually overturned it and returned it back to what it should have been, like birthing mother. So big win. But the thing that I wanted to really speak to her about was her case. She has this human rights violation case. She's the CEO and founder of this female-only app called Giggle, and the whole angle is that it's for females only. And you go on there, and there's all these different functions like messaging, and kind of like there's an air tasker and like a roommate type thing. But yeah, the whole angle is that it's for females only. Basically, what happened was she ended up kicking off this trans-identifying male, a trans woman, as a lot of people would say. She saw it. There's a photo of a man that's trying to use the app. So she kicked him off. Now, I kind of know Sall as this prominent feminist. So in my mind, she started this app kind of aware of the outrage that it would cause. But in fact, it's completely opposite. She started it, and I think she would herself admit that she was quite naive and ignorant of kind of what was going on with the trans rights activist movement. And she even says that she was possibly open to trans-identifying men being able to use it. Right? Kind of thought was like, why not? And then she quickly got a lot of hostility from these trans-identifying men, a lot of threats, and it was very ugly. And she did a little more kind of research and thinking and looked into it, and she realized, oh, this is exactly why there should be a female-only space to protect women from this ugliness. And so she kicked off this man, and then a while after that, she found herself with a human rights violation because it was gender discrimination. So she's got to go to court now. She's got to go to the federal court and fight this case. And if she loses it, she could then take it to the high court, like the highest court in Australia. And it could come down to this kind of constitutional challenge in Australia of this definition of what is a woman and what is a man. And it's the craziness that in 2023, we have to define what is a woman and what is a man. Anyway, it's a great conversation. We kind of really dig into it. She talks about the background of the app, and we talk a lot about the whole kind of trans issue and, our thoughts on all of it. But yeah, I just want to say before we get into the conversation, and I've got a video to lead into it as well, that if you want to help fund her, and she does need help, it's incredibly expensive case. So any support at all, she would definitely appreciate. So go to gigglecrowdfund.com. I'll put the link in the description. And so please help and donate to help her. I mean, if you care about the definition of women and man in Australia, which I think we all should, then you should donate and help her out. This case has huge implications to actually impact women's sports and a whole lot of kind of different areas. It's a great conversation. It was really great talking with Sall. So I think you'll enjoy this conversation. And thanks for tuning in for the episode.
It was a historic night here with Laurel Hubbard competing as the first openly transgender in a individual event. And I was wondering, what you felt about that and what you felt that took place in your sport.
No, thank you. Leah Thomas will always have a male body.
This Leah Thomas has been through puberty, so that's 10 years of having testosterone.
Thomas wins the NCAA championship.
Making broader shoulders and bigger lungs and strength.
Bone structure, the slightly bigger heart, more red blood cells.
I'm not a threat to women's sports because I am a woman.
6 spots qualify for the New England meet, and I came in 8th place, and the 2 transgender athletes came 1 and 2.
For the second year in a row, a transgender wrestler has won the Texas Girls Championship.
Things like shoulder width, those things don't change when transgender women suppress testosterone. They don't get shorter.
You want to be able to compete on a fair playing field.
This isn't fair.
A biological male named Fallon Fox was allowed to fight against a female. Fox broke the skull of female fighter Tamika Brents.
We went the exact same time down to the 100th of a second. Having only 1 trophy, the NCAA told me that I would go home empty-handed and this trophy would go to Thomas. And when I questioned this, the NCAA told me that Thomas had to hold it for photo purposes.
Every time we try to voice it, we get told to be quiet.
I decided I wasn't going to disrespect the race organizer or my country, and I smiled for the podium photo.
Jill and the Secretary of State gave the Woman of Courage Award today to a biological man.
Motherfuckers! I need your corporate number because I'm going to call them and talk about how it's misgendered several times in the store. For me now. Give me your corporate number. Well, I'm going to ask you for the 5th time to stop calling me a man, because quite clearly I am not.
Transgender female inmate has been moved to a men's prison after impregnating 2 other biological female inmates.
This is a dangerous, violent sex offender, a double rapist, once known as Adam Graham. And here is the same person, now identifying as a woman, Isla Bryson, a predator who's been detained in a women's prison.
Why should an adult penis be in the same space as female-only space as my daughter?
You're all spreading hate.
me and my missus just had a baby, so we were gonna say we owe you possibly some thanks. We were doing the Medicare forms, and it was a relief to see that it was.
That was honestly one of the funniest things that has ever happened, because if it's correct in what they were saying, it was only being trialed in 3 hospitals, and the trial was almost up.
Yeah.
It just so happened that I had a baby in one of the hospitals where it was happening. So they must have been sitting there going, like, we almost got away with it. And that stupid bitch had to go and have a baby.
Yeah.
Because when it happened, like when I was there with my mum was in the room, and I got the form and I was like, and I just went, oh, it says birthing parent. And I did this eye roll, and I just took a photo of it. And I just signed it, like whatever, like I had no choice. And then I just did a tweet, and like I've tweeted 50 billion things. Nothing's ever happened. And then I've been home from the hospital like 3 days. I was up at 4 a.m. because that's what it's like with a newborn. You would know this. And the Today Show message saying, can you come on today? And I was like, yeah, no problem. I'm up anyway. And then like I did the interview, and they messaged 45 minutes later and said, can you come back on? Because Bill Shorten's announced that he's going to change it. And I was like, what? Nothing ever happens.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? Yeah, crazy.
Well, you must have had a bit of a crazy past month or so. I mean, is it that it's hit the media more, or has it really kind of just jumped up a gear?
Do you mean the whole like trans stuff in general?
It just feels like the past month. I mean, it felt like particularly with the Posey Parker.
Yeah. I mean,
since that tour, it's just kind of
been
nonstop.
So you're in Australia as well. How long have you been following the trans issue for?
I mean, not obsessively, but pretty closely. I mean, probably because I've had trans friends.
Yeah.
So it's this weird kind of thing of, I know you kind of, you've got your like Hollywood screenwriter background. And I've kind of got more independent filmmaking background.
Oh, cool.
So and I was much more of a lefty, like in my like early 20s,
We all.
That's right, yeah. So I kind of floated around those circles, and and it's kind of, I like to still think I got trans friends, but probably if they saw some of my videos or we had conversations.
I mean, I knew some trans people before this. I've made more trans friends in this because, like, if you're a trans person, like, and you just acknowledge reality, and you don't use like female-only spaces, like if you're male and you don't use female-only spaces, I don't have that much of a problem with you.
No, yeah, of course.
My only thing I would say is I think it would be just better if there was you could just be a gender non-conforming man.
Yeah.
I just don't think that there needs to be any other labels with it. That would probably be my main thing. But I'm like, I would see this person as just an extremely gender non-conforming man. Cool. I don't care.
Yeah.
With all my trans friends, I have spoken to them all about it, that I don't use like preferred pronouns to them, which only would happen when they're not around, when I'm not speaking to them.
Right.
Because, I'm not friends with people who control how I speak. And I wouldn't want anyone to be friends with me if I was trying to control them either.
Yeah.
I'm yet to have a problem with that, to be honest. Like,
yeah.
Your friends are your friends. I don't judge a person on their identity. I judge them on their character. So I have no problem like being friends with a trans person.
Yeah.
But if it was, I'm just not going to be friends with a man who wants to come into a female-only space. We're not going to like each other.
Which is, I always thought that's how it was in the past anyway. The older trans, it used to be just this thing of like, when they dressed up, they didn't believe they were actually the identity of who they were dressed up as.
In terms of interaction with like just the concept of, it was transsexualism. It would have been around 2009, 2010 was when I was sort of like introduced in reality to it. I lived in West Hollywood, basically on the border of Boys Town. So my local bar, the end of the street, was a gay bar. And in America, they have this brilliant thing with happy hour where it goes from like 4 till 8. And it's like 2-for-1 drinks. So, you'd arrive at 3:59 and then stumble home at 8:01 and have spent $20 and you're just absolutely blind. It was brilliant as a 24-year-old. And at the bar that we used to go to, there might have been more, but from memory, there were 2 guys that said that they were transsexuals, and they would always be wearing, makeup and clothes or whatever. And some of them had a little bit of decent amount of surgery, but you could tell that they were male. There was just no mystery about it. And they just had a really great sense of humor about who they were. They really knew who they were, and they owned the transsexualism of it. That was they're proud of that. And so it just didn't bother me at all. I was like, you just sort of accept people for who they are in that sense. This has got such a long time ago. I didn't ever talk to them about female-only spaces or anything like that. We were in a gay bar. I assumed that they went to the male bathroom. I don't know. I didn't check. I didn't think about it at that particular time, because when I think back to it, my instinct would have been that, of course, they would have been going to a male bathroom. They were just men. So I just didn't even think about it in those terms. And then in 2018, when we were developing the app, Giggle, female-only app, and I had no idea any of this was happening. I'd never tweeted before, but I was on Twitter. I followed lots of people. I was in a Trump-hating bubble of journalists and comedians. And, we were all in shock that he'd been elected. We all hated him and wanted to work out, how did this happen? And so I was just listening to all these voices that I really respected. And none of this came up in where I was. I remember there was one day where there was an actor that I followed that had when I think back to it, had misgendered someone, and obviously people had been going after him, and there was a few tweets that I just saw out of the corner of my eye, but I didn't pay attention to it. So I really had just no concept of it. And I didn't look into it, which is what they want, I suppose. I was being I was being a good lefty.
Yeah.
And then, so when we talked a lot, with Giggle, just doing things right, and what we wanted to do and achieve and blah, blah, blah. And one of the things that I had seen a lot of was the concept of inclusion, diversity and inclusion. They were definitely buzzwords that were around. And someone had said, what about trans women? And most of the people in the room who were involved in the development of Giggle, in fact, every single one of them said no. And I was actually the one that said yes, because I was thinking about this, this tiny minority, which I knew that had been talked about, from a long time ago, this tiny minority, that it was just these guys that really did try hard to present as women, were very, very grateful if they were sort of included in something like that, and were, in my experience, it's sort of quiet yet humorous, just non-threatening. I was just okay. I was thinking, maybe we're doing one a month or something, and I was wrong in what I was saying in many, many different ways, because a female space is a female-only space, no ifs, ands, and buts. Yeah. So I was wrong, but I didn't realize in how many ways that I was wrong at the time, because also that's not what we were talking about. Even in 2018, 2019, it was already, anyone who basically says that they're a woman is. And so, come February 2020, I was just publicly thrust into this absolutely bizarre world that I didn't know existed, and had to learn really, really quickly what was going on. And I did. I just went and researched everything that was being said, and I found just so quickly that what the women were saying was right. They didn't tell a word of a lie. And it was actually even worse than what they were all saying.
That's
because it's still public.
That's interesting, because I did, because I only recently heard of you, I think, with this whole kind of Posey Parker, thing.
Yeah.
And then, Catherine Dees was kind of in the news last year.
She's my friend, love her.
Yeah, so it's kind of seeing all right, starting to kind of dig into the kind of women's rights movements.
Yeah.
And I kind of, you're quite prominent. You've got quite a big following, and, so hearing about the case with Giggle, it was kind of interesting because I think all right, well, here's this feminist who's got this app and part of it is about being kind of like exclusive women's only. And so from the get-go, it was like, all right, that specifically means no trans women. But in fact, you actually came, it's the other way around. You actually, there was a journey for you to arrive.
It was. So basically I woke up on the 7th of February, 2020, inundated with abuse. And I'd never experienced, I'd never tweeted, my Instagram is private, my Facebook's private. Like I was not on social media in any public way. And when I'm talking inundated with abuse, they'd found me on Twitter, found me on Instagram, did private messages there, and inundated our App Store and Google Play with abuse and 1-star things. Now keep in mind, trans women were welcome.
Yeah.
That was the policy at that moment in time. We hadn't launched yet. And so what the situation was is obviously, you can go into it more, but we have like onboarding security to ensure that it's female only. We were testing it all. Like our security wasn't in place yet. We were just beta testing, and they found us. And I woke up to it was so traumatic. And so I just had to go in and research everything. And I laid low for many months. I still didn't speak out about it until so that happened in the February. It wasn't until June, July that I started speaking out about it in 2020, around the same time that J.K. Rowling did her woman tweet and then her essay. And that really did inspire me. There was 2 things that inspired me, that, and then also in around March, what made me go helped me go, okay, I'm not like this evil person they're all saying, is Buck Angel, who's a trans man, had done a podcast on a lesbian podcast called Scissoring is Not a Thing, where he talked about that there's no such thing as 100% inclusion. Female-only spaces are completely necessary. There's all different sort of things that need to cater to specific demographics of people. So to be able to cater to a specific demographic, you can't have 100% inclusivity, because if you're just catering to everybody, so many people are going to miss out. So I just got I decided if I was going to speak out, I wanted to just make sure I was just as educated as you could possibly be. And so still to this day, I research every single day and make sure I'm across all the points. And then I did, but I did come into this of basically trying to do what they say they want you to do. And I got destroyed by them. They say cancel culture doesn't exist. Yes, it does. I got canceled right out of the gate. And so, yes, I've spent the last 3.5 years building up a profile on Twitter, and I'm now prominent somewhat in Australia for saying women don't have a dick. No one should be prominent for saying that. It's so stupid. But it's been this absolutely terrifying and sometimes really lonely time. And so that's why I asked, just before, how long have you been, sort of following what's been happening? Because in the last 3 weeks, the conversation is sort of changing and there's more people becoming aware of what's going on. But I've been in this over 3 years now. And so, I was, all us, the few Australian women that knew what was going on. And, they say there was 100 of us online that were in Australia who knew what was going on. We were following what was happening in the UK and the US and Canada, and commenting on that all of the time and trying to bring awareness and just write and talk about it as much as possible. And then finally there's been sort of a switch that's happened in Australia. And I think Posey Parker has done an amazing thing.
Yeah, she was this lightning rod,
Yeah, she was always going to be. I think she was shocked how horrible and bad Australian media is. Us in Australia aren't. But I was when it really blew up, in Melbourne, when it blew up there with the stupid Nazis arriving, there was the few days after that, they were so traumatic, because when you're on the side of it, I know Kelly J, I know the women who organized the Melbourne event. I was at the Brisbane event. I know that there's no Nazism in this. And when you're watching it be portrayed that way, it's terrifying and traumatic. seeing it play out, and that there's no opportunity to be in opposition to that narrative. It's very unsettling. I'm always one of those people, like, I'm the eternal optimist. I want to always think that it's like, I used to have these debates with my dad, who's a bit more of a realist than I am, and I was like the good lefty, and he'd always say, the media is biased, and I've got a master's degree in journalism, and I'd be like, don't be so horrible about the media, old man, blah blah blah. And he was right.
Yeah.
The amount of times my dad has been right about stuff in the last few years on this is one of the things I find most unforgivable. It's like, I'll never get this back.
Yeah, but I think I think that's the thing. It's how things are worded is so pivotal, especially in the media, and it's amazing. You see that especially with the kind of Posey Parker let women speak tour. The fact that immediately when you see any kind of headline where it's an anti-trans protest, it's like implicit bias. You're like, right, well, I immediately know just from that, where they're coming from.
It's just so interesting. It's just so interesting that even a male criminal can say, I want to be called a woman, and the media will bow down to that. And Posey Parker will say, I am a women's rights campaigner. And they will not acknowledge that. They'll just call her anti-trans. Yeah. So already you're seeing that there is total inequality in how people are being treated here. And this is from the diversity and inclusion and equity people. I mean, this is in no way what they want. You have these activists that turn up to these events saying no TERFs on our turf. And you're like, doesn't sound very inclusive. Yep. Like, it seems to be, to me, that you're pretty cool with exclusion. It's just, if it's exclusion of men in female spaces, suddenly you've got a problem. I mean, it just seems, when you get to this, as involved in it as I am, it just becomes, it's so clear of what is going on. It's sometimes hard to explain it to people who aren't yet up to date, or just sort of just testing the waters to see what's going on. Yeah. All you can say is, yes, laws are being changed that say men are actually women if they claim to be, and they can go and do things that override the rights of actual women. That's it in a nutshell. It's as bad as it sounds.
Yeah. What do you because I think maybe this can kind of segue into what's going on with you with your case.
Yeah.
But demographic wise, because I think when people hear trans, I think that's why they think of it as this kind of LGB gay rights thing where it's just a natural progression. So in their mind, trans, it's, boys, girls, women, men. It's the same kind of breakdown as this is kind of just be what you want to be, kind of thing where it's, I mean, what's your experience with the demographics of, men and women? I mean, you kind of cop a lot with the app when it comes to trans women specifically.
There's so many.
I like how you phrase it again with the words where you say was it a trans identifying male?
Yeah, I did a tweet not long ago where I said that the journey for pretty much everybody is, you sort of start to go like, oh, hang on, there's something going on, but you'll be like, I'll still be polite, I'll say trans woman, and then you learn a bit more, and you're like, oh, okay, trans identified male, and you go like a bit further. And then it'll be like men who think they're women. And then you get to the point where I'm and you're just like, men.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Because that's a weird thing. Whenever you say trans woman, especially with like older people, you always got to do that backflip in your mind,
Well, this is the thing. When you use the term trans woman, it's a complete mental manipulation, because most people will actually just picture a woman in their head. So you're talking about trans women in sports, and they're just picturing a woman in sports. Or a trans woman in a female space is picturing a woman. Because that's what your mind does. It just takes the word and sort of a word there that's identifiable, and it sort of physicalizes that in your mind. And there's nothing you can really imagine with the word trans. It doesn't really mean anything to most people. And so they're just picturing a woman. But if you just say a man who thinks he's a woman, you get a much more accurate picture.
And that's what you see. When you see a trans woman, you see a man trying to be a woman,
Yeah, and when there's conversations about, like, or the ones who pass. None.
Yeah, that's right.
Zero.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, the Instagram filters can do like some heavy lifting online, so you can sometimes see a picture and be like, "Oh, okay, like that's." I pause for a second, and then you see what that person looks like in real life. You're like, "It's a man."
Yeah, well, that's
just a
Dylan Mulvaney thing. Of this guy's gone, like, had the facial surgery. He's as famous as you could get, and yet still he's complaining that no men are DMing.
Doesn't it just screams as being like just a joke that went too far, but he's getting quite a lot from it. And so, I mean, hopefully for him, he's saving his money, because I think that the when it stops for him, it's going to be quite abrupt and quite a horrible place to be in. But to answer your question, so it's almost wrong to say like just trans as being this homogenous demographic. It just doesn't exist. Like, say when you've got like lesbian or gay, it is, because it's just men who are attracted to men, women who are attracted to women, might have all different sort of lifestyles, or just how you live your life, blah blah blah. But it's just such a clear thing. But with trans, it's not, because you've got grown men who are suddenly, in their sort of middle-aged twilight years, suddenly discovering that they're a woman, apparently. Then you've also got teenage girls who are suddenly deciding that they're men. Now, these two demographics could not be more different, and they're actually the only way that you can view them in any meaningful way to understand them is through their sex. Gender is meaningless. Everything about it comes back to their sex, because the females are behaving exactly how you would expect females to behave, and the males are behaving exactly how you would expect males to behave. So for me, obviously, I have dealt with males who think that they're women, and they've been absolutely horrible. Bar the few that I've met that are friends, but they're men who would never dream of going into a female-only space. And I'm talking like 5 people here. I'm talking about the activists. Horrible. And then I've talked to quite a lot of like women who claim to be men, some who agree with me and many who don't. One thing that is unanimous with them all is that they don't have an interest in female-only space. Like, I always spoke to them in the context of like going on the app, because they are welcome. They're females.
That's funny, right? So trans people are actually welcome on your app.
Yeah, no, we're not trans exclusionary. We're male exclusionary. This is a really important distinction. Yeah. But all of them say that they don't have an interest in it because they don't identify themselves as women. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, but it is there if you want it. If you find yourself in a situation where you go like, oh, I actually do need to go and talk specifically to females about an issue, you can go in. There's no problem. But you're called a transphobe just because you acknowledge that these women are women. Yeah. So you're in a no-win situation. You can be like, I'm extending an invitation. I'm being inclusive of you, and you're a bigot.
Yeah.
So, it's like there is this actual demographic of trans people who want to be excluded from a female-only space. They're the females.
Yeah. I wasn't sure about. It was this question of why there's so many young girls who are transitioning to become boys, teenagers. And it was this thing of like, why? Because so much in society, there's this whole toxic masculinity and a bit of a kind of pile on, in my mind, being a man for, for the past few years. So it was this thing of just like, well, why would you want to be a man? And then I heard Jordan Peterson, actually, who said it very, very well, where he's saying that, with girls going through puberty, they have this body image thing. I mean, boys do too, but it's different. It's not to the same extent. And so you throw in you throw in this gender thing as well to add this level of confusion. And
I've always, even when I remember when I was going through puberty, I always thought that like puberty would be traumatic for boys as well, because like your voice breaks in public and stuff like that. Like how embarrassing, and like getting boners and things like that. Like, puberty is not kind.
It's definitely awkward
to anyone. Yeah, and like when you get older, you think back to it. Like no one would, relive that time. Like it's so horrible. I mean, I was I had bad skin. I was super skinny. Oh, it was just horrible. I also got glasses and braces in the same week when I was 13. It was just so traumatic. But there's something interesting happening at the moment with, say, if we just look at girls, that, I mean, I wouldn't want to be a teenage girl right now. Being a teenage girl, we can say, you know, really non-controversially, has never been that fun. But now, when you've got social media and how much, just even in the last 5 years, how it's escalated, but basically you're seeing every day, you know, these Instagram models, and it's just so hypersexualized and so hyper feminine in the most stereotypical and I would say toxic way. You know, it's fake boobs, it's fake butts now. I didn't know this was a thing until a few years ago. And then, you know, and then you've got like the OnlyFans on top of that. And these sort of, you know, you don't see the articles of the women who earn like $8 a month.
Oh, I mean, yeah, it's like what, 2% actually,
which is which is most of them.
Yeah,
you only hear about the ones that are, you know, earning $1 million a month, which is like 8 women in the world, and God knows what they're doing for that. And so, if you don't identify with that in any way, and you've got all of this concept of gender already swirling around the internet as well, and you go, well, I don't identify with this version of femininity, of what is becoming sort of the standard concept of femininity in this day and age, and you're like, well, maybe I'm a boy. And so I can see why they would think it. It's like a trauma response. I mean, but it's just another surgical avenue, isn't it? It's like either get your boobs made bigger or have them removed.
Yeah.
Imagine being a girl right now. And I mean, they're out there who are just, you know, saying no to all of it. I mean, they're tough cookies. That's a hard way that you've got to be really strong, I think, to resist it all.
Yeah.
And because you're essentially getting no praise.
Yeah.
You're only seeing the only women who are getting praised are the trans men or the OnlyFans ones. So that would be horrible. And then, and so then apparently I mean, there's so many people who can speak on much more authority on this, but social contagions amongst young women, like so teenage age girls, is completely understood.
Yeah.
So it's like no mystery as to why this would happen.
Yeah. Which is not, I mean, that's the thing. It's not uncommon. You know, you've had these waves in the past of bulimia, anorexia, cutting, you know, and you have that where it's like, this is the thing for whatever reason, you know.
Yeah. I didn't know this actually. I was just listening to something just the other day. But so, because Tumblr, that site is a real part of the puzzle as to why young people have gotten on board with gender and social contagion. And in the early mid-1910s, there was quite an epidemic of self-harm amongst girls. Like that was the social contagion. It was, you know, there's still anorexia and bulimia left over from the 90s and the 2000s. And then self-harm cutting became the thing. And then on Tumblr, they actually stopped any posts about harm. Those posts weren't allowed anymore. So it stopped a lot of their content, and the contagion stopped. However, it was actually rebranded as gender.
Yeah, well, you have TikTok these days, and there's this,
and now it's on
this thing of that China's deliberately trying to kind of, you know, destabilize the West by pushing, you know.
Yeah, I hear those sorts of things, and sometimes I think some things get into a bit conspiracy theory realm, and I always ask myself, does it all work without the conspiracy theory? Like, do you need it?
Sure, of course.
And I just don't think you need it. I think that if there's anything like so extremely sinister happening,
but I think it's interesting, that idea of
it wouldn't change it, would it? It's still, you know, I think all of the assumptions that you can make and all of the evidence points to just, it's a perfect storm of everything happening, of just human nature, of social media. COVID didn't help, like lockdown, people being, you know, more online than we ever have before. Everything sort of just happened, and especially if you're a young person, it was just sort of this explosion.
But yet it appears to be kind of unique to the West.
Yeah. The only that I know about, the only I've spoken to a woman who tracks this in India, and so there actually is a lot of transgenderism in India.
Okay, yeah.
India is also still an incredibly homophobic culture.
Yeah.
Gay marriage isn't legal.
Yeah.
But a lot of transgender laws have passed.
Well, that's like Iran, right? Iran is a crazy amount because you can't be gay. So yeah.
Even more so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they literally trans the gay away.
Yeah.
Which when you say like transing the gay away, it makes it sound like you think, oh, that person can change sex. No. They're selling this false promise that you can change sex. Like that's why I think that this whole thing is so fundamentally evil. Because you've got people, doctors, pharmaceutical therapists, all these sorts of people, telling people that you can change sex. They're called sex change operations and cross-sex hormones, all this sort of stuff. And charging them money and then performing surgeries and giving them drugs that doesn't do that.
Yeah.
No human has ever changed sex. You're just giving a guy a boob job or cutting off his dick. Or you're just giving a girl a hysterectomy. And like, surgeries that can only be performed on a sex. So, removing a penis can only be performed on a man, and a hysterectomy can only be performed on a female. How can a surgery that can only be performed on one sex change you into the other sex? No, it's just removed an organ that is related to that sex. That's it.
Yeah, well, I think that's a big thing with when people try and kind of lump trans in with gay rights. There's this feeling of you've got to be on the right side of history, and this fear that you're on the wrong side, like people have been with gay rights or, or with race or, everything. But that's the thing. It's you can't turn back after you've have these procedures, especially not when you're young and you have the hormone blockers. Well, there's serious,
Of course. And also being gay is completely understood. Like just like the psychology of it, science of all of that. This is understood in the world. Transgenderism is not. It's understood in the sense that if you go actually into the proper stuff, it's just not real. There is a concept of gender dysphoria, yeah, but it's still having a discomfort in your sexed body does not mean you are the opposite sex. And to compare it to gay rights, I mean, this is just like the ultimate branding manipulation of all time. If you even just take Australia, for gay people to be able to get married, to have their relationships legally recognized with marriage, they had to go through the indignity of a nationwide plebiscite where everyone could vote on this. And this is only a few years ago. Like after decades of begging, it was like, okay, fine, we'll put it to a national vote. So that was what, 2016?
Yeah, 2016 about, yeah.
16, 17 at the latest. Yeah. 2000, yeah, it's either one of them. Yeah, so the definition of woman was taken out of the Sex Discrimination Act in 2013. Gender identity was put in there in 2013. So these laws that were changed in stealth in favor of gender ideology happened before gay marriage happened. No one had to beg for anything. When you have these people right now going around saying that they're the most oppressed, marginalized minority in the world, no, they got laws changed in stealth. Yeah. And the law's currently on their side. Yeah. So what are they complaining about? All they're complaining about is that people who are realizing what's happening and we're not going along with it. And so that's why I think that if you're going to have people have medication and surgical procedures to emulate the opposite sex, the proper practice has to be to say it doesn't make you change sex. And if you do this, it doesn't actually mean you can go and use female-only spaces or be in female-only sport or anything, because that would be you taking away rights from another group of people. You can do this if you want, but you're just going to have to know that you don't get to go and identify into that other group of people. Yeah. I wonder how many people would do it.
Yeah, well, Dylan Mulvaney hasn't done it yet.
Very few men actually do that procedure. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's more young women who are getting surgical procedures. From my understanding, it's more of the young women who are, and there is an increasing number of men, lots of younger guys who are taking hormones and stuff. Yeah. in terms of that particular operation of actually just snipped off, very few. And thankfully, because it's a barbaric procedure, and frankly, no one should get it done.
I mean, that's the other thing. They don't like the photos. You know, the photos of, I mean, the wrist photos from the muscle tissue.
Try not to look. I try not to look. I can't. Yeah. I just find it. I find it so horrible. I mean, to be fair, I've got a really weak stomach. Like, I can't even really watch Grey's Anatomy surgery scenes. Like, I just can't deal with any of it. Like, for example, when I had a baby, and they're all like trying to be all lovely with me, and like, oh, and what do you want done with the placenta? And I was like, I want to pretend it doesn't exist. I don't want to see it. I don't want to know about it. Like, get it away from me without me knowing about it. Thanks. Like, I just can't deal with gore. God, I'm dry reaching.
No, that was me. That was my missus was continually showing me videos on Instagram, and I was just thinking, like, you need a warm, like, you've just woken me up. Like, you've got to, because I'm seeing everything, and
I just can't deal with it. Even like, even when my baby was born, and they were like, do you want her straight on your chest? And I was like, can you
all spray down.
Yeah, just a little wipe down. I've got a really weak stomach for anything like that. Like, I could never have been like a doctor or a nurse. Or I just do not have the constitution for it. So so seeing the images of what has happened, like what is happening to young people's bodies, and obviously I see it like out there. I just try and look away as quickly as possible. It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, I think there's something visceral that you can't really deny when you see it. And I think it's similar to the kind of like drag story hours, where you see the footage with these kind of twerking men.
I can't watch that either.
No, there's something that's just so, instinctually wrong, where there's something about just like men just exuding sexuality in front of kids.
Yeah, like the drag queen story hour. I never had a real problem with drag queens. I used to go to drag queen bingo at Hamburger Mary's in West Hollywood all the time. They were really fun. I just had no problem with this. And like now, if it was like there were all these initiatives for like drag queen Meals on Wheels and like drag queen reading or doing like sort of show tune stuff to like elderly people in nursing homes, I'd be like, well, that's kind of fun, isn't it? Like, that would be sort of cool. Why is it just reading books, gender-orientated books to kids? Yeah. Why just that?
Yeah. And
that's the only and it's all in this like diversity and inclusion. Well, why aren't you having like butch lesbians reading books to kids? Why? Because what about just like gay men in a suit because he's come from his job as an accountant?
But why do they want to? That's the thing. Why do they? Because it's the same thing with like I have no interest to go to a woman's bathroom. Or like women's only, if my missus is going to be catching up with her girlfriends, I'm not going to be hanging around. If that's an excuse to go hang out with the guys, great,
Totally. And because, this is just like a healthy part of life. Like sometimes we sort of do things with our tribe. Like humans are quite tribal people still. Guys have guy nights. We have nights with the girls. Yeah. And, you would notice this, like when you're doing stuff just with the guys, even if it's like when one woman arrives, even if it's like your wife, partner, whatever, just arrives, like just the conversation changes. And it's the same for us. A husband can arrive at the table just to like, for a second, freeze the conversation. Yeah. Body language changes. And it's not even about safety or anything. It's just, it's just different. Like this is just normal human stuff. And until 5 minutes ago was completely non-controversial to talk about. Now to say that, just to say that you want to do something like that, just to go to female-only spaces occasionally, you're a bigot. And you've got, women are having to bring up the most traumatic things that have ever happened to us to justify them. And I'm just done doing it. I'm like, no, we want them. They're fun. End of story. Fuck off. Like, I'm not saying anything more about it.
Yeah, well, okay, let's get to your app and with this case.
Yeah.
So what's the timeline with this? So you launch? Do you do like a soft launch? What's the?
Well, that was the plan.
Okay.
That was the plan. But in February 2020, the trans activists discovered us. and we just had to run with it, like just, overnight go with it. So I got sidetracked before, but we basically internally as a company had talks about what we would do on the trans issue. And I was like, well, I've read everything. Like I was wrong. I called this wrong. This is female only, blah, blah, blah. But we didn't like make any announcement or anything like that because I was still naive. I thought, the dust will settle.
Yeah.
And it never did. But by like June, July, maybe even August, when I first started speaking out, I think I was still trying to play both sides a little bit. And then, but we'd already said female only with us. And then it just I casually sort of just put it out there that that's how it was. Maybe it would have been better in hindsight to just really sternly say it. But yeah, I mean, we're all smarter in hindsight, aren't we? Anyway, then, so, I mean, we got canceled right out of the gate. And, we're a startup. I've got investors, blah, blah, blah. It was basically just treading water and just keeping it afloat and going for the last 3 years to wait out the storm, basically. And then last year, like June, July, I had my baby, so it would have been late July, early August. It was just technology. We needed to do so many updates with it. And so we were like, and we'd spent 3 years learning what our market wanted. It was different to what, there was different, like some different user experiences different to what we had done. So we spent 3 years just learning everything that we could. And so we were like, okay, either we update this actual platform or we sort of take it apart and completely rebuild it. And we have taken it apart and completely rebuilt it. So it's actually not available.
Yeah. I said I went because I asked my missus if she could download it, and we saw.
Yeah, so we can't. So it's still on the App Store and Google Play in the sense that we just sort of made the decision to just sort of leave the carcass there for the sharks to search. And because you'd see there's so many 1-star reviews and everything, we've got to just transfer all that over. We want all of that on record, and so it's just a time thing that just go and do it all. So it's still there, but it doesn't work. It's offline.
And so you launch it, and the whole kind of angle is that it's a women's only space. And so you've got like a kind of AI type thing where someone takes a photo.
So basically it was an app where you could go, it's sort of like many different apps in one. You could go there, and it was like a female only roommate app, a female only like freelancing app. So sort of like Airtasker with just women. You could like sort of Airbnb type stuff, just women. Then we had like a female only Twitter. And then there's like also like private, like you could connect for like private conversations for support or health related things. And then there was also like lesbian dating. So just so many different categories of things to do. So when we were developing it, so keep in mind developing it, not knowing what all of this was going on, we just knew that there would be men in general who would want to try and get on it. Like, because how would you create a female only space unless there was not some sort of safeguarding process? And so we just looked into the ways that you could do that. And there was, very unfortunately named gender recognition software. It's by Kairos. And I really wish they'd change the name of it because it's sex recognition software. But they're using gender as a synonym for sex. There's the polite. Which is how I interpreted it at the time. They have since been like, oh God, that is really frustrating that it's named that. But anyway, so basically, you just, when we discovered it, we were like, well, that is the best way to do it because it's basically just a user takes a selfie, the AI scans it, whether you male or female, we always have had a human being like watching just to back it up because I would never leave like my company in the hands of a robot, essentially. But I remember when our tech guy who knows everything, when he told me about it, and I was like, well, that's brilliant because 2018 Sal that's the least controversial way to do it because how we can tell if someone's male or female is by looking at them. You don't have to ask any other information or anything. It's just a photo. That's it. And we put photos of ourselves online all the time. We take selfies, like thousands of them a day. Like this is the most non-controversial way to do it. Apparently, we live in a world now where the most normal human skill of being able to just tell someone's male or female with your eyes is wrong. But that's basically what it is, yeah. So we did lots of testing with it. You could have, you have the accuracy setting, and we set it to 94% accuracy. It worked exactly as you would think 94% accuracy would work. So yes, it did let on men occasionally.
So you were able to change that variable in case, say, there's more like a masculine-looking woman,
Well, it wasn't that we would just change it according to that. It's just that we found that at 94% accuracy, it didn't knock back women, but it did occasionally let on a man. And so we were like, well, we'd rather kick off a man than knock back a woman. So that's what we went with. And cut to, January 2022, and I got a human rights complaint from a man who claims to be a woman.
Yeah, let's, I got a photo of that. This is the...
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the person.
Yeah. And so I got a human rights complaint because they had gained access to the platform and they were removed, as was common practice. Now, you've got to also just keep in mind, for context, thousands upon thousands of men tried to access the app.
Right.
So, if one or two slipped through here or there, they would just be removed. There was just never any issue about this. I mean, we'd get abused. Like, they'd write 1-star reviews or they'd send us abusive emails or things like that. But it just became such a normal part of the workday. We just ignore it.
Yeah.
It was just all part of it. And so I thought, I don't remember specifically removing this individual, but it would have been me doing it in the time frame. It definitely was me. And then, so I got a human rights complaint. Oh, one little thing. In October 2021, he had texted and called my phone, which is the only person ever, only potential user of the app who has ever called or texted my phone. And when it happened, I was immediately freaked out. I just moved into an apartment with my boyfriend. We now have a baby together, but we just moved in together. And he was away, and I was just immediately freaked out because from my perspective, it was just a guy texting and calling my phone. And I called my dad and I said, "What should I do?" And he goes, "Block the number and don't tell your mother." That's exactly what I did. And then in the January, I got a human rights complaint.
How does one get a human rights complaint? Like, how are you?
Yeah, I don't know. Just anyone make them about anything.
Do you get it by email, or do you?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, you do. You do. So how it happened for me is I was 15 weeks pregnant and I was in lockdown because I had COVID. So my joke is, it's like I got this human rights complaint when I was like isolated away from not even being able to interact with humans. It's like just every part of this was just too good to be true and too poetic. But so I got an email. Just got an email saying, this is such and such from the Australian Human Rights Commission. We've got a complaint. Is this the correct email for you to receive it on? And it's like, yeah. And I called Kath Deves, actually. She was the first person I called because she's my friend and she's a lawyer. And so I was just like, what do I do? And she was like, just get it, read it, and contact Anna Kerr at the Feminist Legal Clinic. So I got it. It was for gender identity discrimination. And then it was basically, I'd never had a human rights complaint against me before.
Yeah, okay, Sure.
So I had no idea what to do. And I was, hormones were all over the place. I was so emotional about it the whole time. I couldn't speak, couldn't talk. They were saying, just don't say anything about it yet, blah, blah, blah. So I had to be quiet for months. And then, so we're going back and forth. And basically, to settle it, I had to agree to let that the individual who had done the complaint, I had to let them on the app, all men who claim they're women on the app, attend sex and gender education which could only be re-education, because what else could it mean? And moderate all women's conversations so not to offend men who claim to be women. And so obviously I said no to all of this. I was like, there's just no way I'm agreeing to any of that. Not even a portion of it, none. And so I said no to going to conciliation, which is when that would have all been discussed, knowing that we wouldn't reach a settlement. We wouldn't reach an agreement on this. And I was also pregnant. I just wasn't going to put myself through it. And so I said no to conciliation, knowing that by doing so ran the risk of it being taken to federal court, because basically what happens is the Human Rights Commission doesn't have any like actual legal, that's what I'm looking for, like any like legal obligation, rights to do anything, like they can't impose anything on you or punishment or anything. Right. They can just go, okay, well, it's out of our hands now, and then advise the applicant of what to do next. And so they advise going like, hey, you've got X amount of time that you can go and take this claim, like file it in federal court and go from there. And so that's what happened. So last year we got the first case of being filed in federal court. So we got a barrister, solicitor on board, all of that. We were getting ready to respond for the first time. So, you get the filing, then you've got, X amount of days to respond. And I had said somewhere along the way, but the only record I can actually find of me saying this was prior to even the court case coming through of us getting notified about it. But I'd said that if we had to, we'd fight it all the way to the High Court. And so then suddenly it was withdrawn, citing like just sort of, the financial implications of that. Like that's a big task to take on if you're filing against someone who's willing to take it to the High Court. So it was withdrawn. I think it was like 2 weeks before I gave birth. So it was just like, from 15 weeks pregnant to 2 weeks before I gave birth, this whole thing happened. So it was just sort of this nice, like, okay, fine, like we'll chalk that up as a win, like yay, like yes, stand your ground, like just cool. And then on the 22nd of December, the case was filed again. I didn't know about it. I found out about it on New Year's Eve because The Guardian did a story about it. Someone sent it to me going, oh, you're going back to court. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? I had no idea. I hadn't been served yet. But it was the top story in The Guardian and The Australian. They did a story on it as well. I had no idea. But so as soon as
how did they find out before you?
I have no idea. But so I read the story and I just sent it to the whole legal team from last time. And I mean, I had a legal team within 10 minutes. It was, okay, here we go again. And so, basically now it's going back and forth. Our next hearing is on the 28th of April. So that's in 17 days time. And that will be the first one where it's like, so the applicant is out of time. So the federal court has to allow for it to go ahead. So that's what will be found out on the 28th. And we have put in as part of our defense that we will be doing a constitutional challenge on gender identity being in the Sex Discrimination Act at all. So if it goes ahead, we will get to actually challenge the fact that that gender identity is essentially, it's so muddled, like in the Sex Discrimination Act, because you put gender identity in the Sex Discrimination Act. I mean, either gender identity doesn't supersede sex, it's irrelevant, so it shouldn't be there, or it does, and so then it should be called the Gender Identity Discrimination Act. Like, they can't coexist together. And I'm not saying you should be able to discriminate just willy-nilly in all different ways against people who have a gender identity. I'm saying it shouldn't be in the Sex Discrimination Act. And so, you shouldn't, obviously, like, I don't want anyone who has, who's gender non-conforming. I don't want anyone to experience any sort of hate crimes for that. I don't want them to lose jobs based on that, like housing or anything like that. No, I'm just saying that you haven't changed sex, and woman is an adult human female and girl is a child human female. These are really important sex classes, not just in law, but actually in practice in society. And we need to be able to recognize that in law, and that no man should be able to identify into that, because the moment he does, he's taking away rights from me. And this whole thing is being, marketed as the civil rights, like fight. There's no other time where the civil rights fight has actually been taking away the rights of anybody else. Like if you look at like gay rights, which was actually a genuine civil rights fight, it was for gay people to have the same rights as everyone else. That's all. And of course they should have the same rights as everybody else. And like then if you look like say in America for like Black people, they wanted the same rights as everyone else. All civil rights movements have been about getting a demographic of people to have the same rights as all demographics of people, like the main demographic, I should say, for lack of a better word, the one that has the most rights. So you want to bring everybody up so that everyone has the most rights. This is not that. This is a demographic of people who are actually not only taking away rights from a demographic, then they're having more rights than anybody else. Because say you, with no gender identity, as a male, you don't have the right to a female-only space, like nor should you. But then you've got this other male standing next to you who does, based on a claim that's like that you can't prove or disprove. So you basically, with our case, like without, obviously like we're in litigation, so I can't go like too deep into it. But what the goal of it is to one, have women defined in the Sex Discrimination Act, because keep in mind it was created for women. So it seems pretty weird not to actually define sex or women, or, I mean, to be fair, men aren't defined in it either. It's just no one is. And to make sure that sex is actually the most important characteristic in the Sex Discrimination Act, that gender identity is not more powerful than sex.
Yeah. So could this set a precedent?
So in federal court, it would, from my understanding, in federal court, it would set a precedent. In high court, it would change the legislation.
Okay.
Yeah. So it would mean that, both, a win in both, like one or the other, both, whatever. It would, they would never be both if we just went in federal court, but it would mean that female-only spaces, services, and sport is protected in Australia. Yeah. So definitely not what I thought I would have to do when I started.
Started at NAP.
I don't know how much experience you've had with startups, but startups are like notoriously stressful and hard to get off the ground in normal circumstances.
Yeah.
And we just so blindly walked into the biggest minefield. Like I say to everyone all the time, I'm like, we had a great idea at the worst possible time in human history. Like even 3 years beforehand, 2 years beforehand, like if you think like 2017 in the height of Me Too, this would not have been controversial.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, it was that quick.
Yeah.
That it happened, that it went from, believe women and listen to women to women don't even exist.
Yeah.
I just don't think that change is an accident. I think that it is, in part, there's a retaliation to Me Too.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, there was flaws with the Me Too movement. Like I even wrote about them. I did 2 articles for Cosmopolitan, one that they didn't publish and one they did. They published my one where I just talked about what had happened to me in Hollywood. And then I wrote another article that they commissioned me for. Just never made it in there. But I actually wrote in defense of, I am going to completely blank on his name. He's the comedian guy, awesome.
Aziz
Ansari. Yeah. I wrote in defense of him because I didn't think that was a situation that was worthy of, like, I just didn't think it was correct what was happening there.
Yeah.
I didn't.
It sounded like a terrible date.
Yeah, but it sounded like he actually did all the right things.
Yeah, that was the one I think for a lot of people where they were kind of like, have you caught all the big monsters? And now it's starting to,
So like I was critical, so I was critical of that. I could see there were some times where I was like, oh, that's not the same thing. And then, so that article didn't get published. But Yeah, I mean, but gender ideology just killed Me Too. I mean, it just doesn't. It's just not even a thing now.
Yeah.
Even in Australia, I don't know if you remember, but I think it was was it last year, 2021? Gosh, I can't. Whenever it happened, but one of the Twitter hashtags in relation to both Brittany Higgins and Grace Tame was "Listen to Women." It was literally one of the hashtags for it.
Yeah.
And then you have Kelly J that comes along with the hashtag "Let Women Speak."
Yeah.
Suddenly we're Nazi bigots.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm not to go against those girls, or say anything bad about them. Like, I'm supportive of them, but they obviously don't speak out about this issue because I think they've dealt with enough abuse in their time. They don't want to. But I mean, when someone like me who is speaking out about female-only spaces, would only benefit all of the other cases of the situations that Grace and Brittany are also advocating for. But yeah, I'm the bigot.
Yeah. Yeah, that's because in my mind, the trans it's all the same people that were on board with Me Too. And they've now, because I think when you look at more kind of conservatives and the right-wing people who were, say, critical of Me Too, or they had some just reservations. I feel like these are the same people who are now pushing back against the trans ideology.
Thing. Yeah, it's a weird thing of so many weird crossovers, and you suddenly allied with people who you wouldn't have been on other issues, or you still wouldn't be on other issues.
I kind of love that though. It kind of reminds me of movies. It reminds me of sequels. It reminds me of sequels where it's the people who are the enemies in the first one. Now there's a bigger threat, and they've got to team up.
Without a doubt. I also it's one of the biggest lessons that I've had in it all. Like I say, coming from that Trump hating bubble.
Yeah.
Now, my intellectual scope of what I listen to has opened up so much more.
Yeah.
That's a gift. There's so many silver linings in all of this.
Yeah.
That I go I really, really appreciate that. There's definitely some commentators or the journalist types who, and even sometimes they talk about other issues, and I'm I really don't agree with you on that. But I don't think of them as the devil anymore. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I'm not oh, okay, so you're this Nazi fascist. I'm oh no, you're just a human being, and we don't agree on some issues, and we do on others.
Yeah.
How lovely to live in a 3-dimensional society where that's should be allowed.
Yeah.
So it's not that I feel all everyone from Me Too is now all in on the trans thing, and all from and then vice versa. What's happened is crazy institutional capture, and what we're seeing is that no one is immune to that.
Yeah.
And so say Women's March, which was a big Me Too initiative, it's completely captured. It was one of the first to fall, actually, because what happened, they had the pink pussy hats, which I hate that word, and I didn't even really like that gimmick as a thing. Didn't really know what kind of point we were trying to make with that.
Yeah, that's how I felt with that. It was a similar thing to with the trans, where it's what's the protest? I genuinely felt that was, and even the Me Too was a reaction to Trump. If Hillary won, there's no Me Too.
I don't know, because I was in Hollywood in pre-Me Too, and it was as bad, if not worse. It was worse, even.
Not to say that there definitely wasn't some.
I think it was inevitable in some way.
But I think that reaction, that actual Me Too, that.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. Yeah, to a point. And he definitely because I think there's a lot of us, trying to work out how the hell someone who's so spectacularly failed up all their life and was just everything your parents told you not to be, when you were just being raised to be a good person, it was just be everything other than that, the opposite of that person. But he'd suddenly become the most powerful person, and to have this job that you're supposed to respect, and he was just going, how can I? And so again, it was one of those perfect storms, wasn't it? In a different way. And then so the Women's March, for example, they you can only laugh at this. One of the ways that they came under fire for the pussy hats is from the trans community, who was like, not all women have vaginas.
Yeah.
So rather than just taking the stupid hats off, they decided to bring men into the Women's March.
Yeah.
And so suddenly it was inclusive of men who claim to be women, to the point now that their logo actually is led with the sort of side profile of a man. It's quite remarkable. But yeah, I don't think it's an accident that this happened. And I also don't think that a lot of like really powerful men, like in media, who do get to dictate like the narratives and what the news cycle is going to be, and who a lot of who were getting Me Too'd, mind you.
Yeah.
I don't think that I don't think they believe in gender ideology. I think it came along and they went, well, that's perfect.
Yeah.
We'll be on board. We'll say men or women, because
Yeah.
it'll shut them up and it'll distract them. And so now, instead of, it's not like, there's so many women's rights we were still like fighting for. Just, even though obviously it is arguably the best it's ever been. But at the same time, there's still things like, so I would say right now, it's not the best it's ever been. I would say that, when you're being erased in law like this, it's getting pretty bad, as bad as it has been even like 150 years ago. But on the surface, everything seems to be really, really cool. And now we're distracted with having to fight for something that not only we already had, but it's just so obvious. Like, you just shouldn't have to fight to say that women are their own sex class. This is just so basic. Everyone's always known that. Like, they knew which group to not allow to vote, and they knew which group to not allow to like have a home loan or buy a house or get a bank account. I mean, I didn't even know this until I was doing research a few years ago, but in Australia, a woman could not get a passport on her own without, like, she had to have either her husband or her father's signature on the form, up until it was either 81 or 83. Because it was either a year after my parents got married or a year before I was born. I can't remember. But basically, that 40 years ago.
Yeah.
My mum and dad, like the first time my mum left the country was with my dad. They went to New Zealand in like 1981 or something. And she does remember getting my dad to sign the form. And she said she just didn't think anything of it. She was just like, I'll just sign this.
Yeah.
Because it was just sort of normal.
Yeah.
But she had to get her husband to sign a form.
Yeah.
Absurd.
Yeah.
So it's just, we're just in this really bizarre time. I think it will pass. I do. It's just managing the carnage until it does. And so there's all different parts of that you have to manage. And that's like, obviously what's happening to kids, but then you've got to also and what's happening to women, but then you've also got to manage gay rights. Because I think one of the scariest thing of this is like LGBT people having the huge backlash after all of this. Because I don't think women aren't going to have a backlash. We're going to actually be, it'll be great for women once this is all over and we've got our rights back. But everyone's going to be looking for someone to blame. Yeah. And it's trying to we've got to make sure that it's the LGBT people are not to blame for this. Because even though, yes, some of their institutions did usher it in. Yeah. The individual people themselves are not to blame for what are predominantly heterosexual men coming in and claiming to be women.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting, I think that future of, because so much of the past, I don't know how long it's been now, but I feel like we've really started, it's that question of how do you order society, and that was it for so long. You had these kind of narrow gender roles for women and for men. And throughout history it was hard for both. I don't really do the who has it worse, because history was just brutal,
Totally. Like I can get on board with that.
For everyone,
shit.
And for sure, it's this kind of, when you look at it, it's always too late. This idea of when women enter the workforce and, how hard they had to do it, and still kind of breaking down these, these gender barriers. And now it's this thing of, I feel like we've been catering to minorities, because it's this question of, what do you do with these minorities that don't quite fit in to these, specific kind of general roles? And it's this thing of, I don't know how you can kind of raise up minorities and restructure society. So it's entirely about catering society around minorities. I don't know how long that goes until there's a bit of backlash, when people get a bit sick of that, really.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't want like actual minorities to receive backlash from this. I just don't think that just like, if you, like I was saying at the beginning, if you actually go, these aren't trans women, these aren't like all of this sort of stuff, they're just men. Men are not a minority.
Yeah.
Even if you're a man who likes to wear women's clothes, like, okay, you're in some way a minority just in your tastes, in your expression of those tastes, or your like sexual fetish, which it is for a lot. I mean, you're not an oppressed minority.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't it be ideal if just like the state was not involved in how people expressed their tastes?
Yeah.
In general.
Yeah.
So if you're a guy who wants to wear women's clothes, even if that is for sort of really questionable reasons, like a sexual fetish, wouldn't it be best if you just did that in private? And,
yeah. Well, that is the interesting thing now, this clash between, I think, mainstream culture with politics, and then you also have this kind of woke corporations now who've adopted this kind of strain of trans, and,
But it's easy, isn't it? It's just because it is actual, like, just literal virtue signaling. Douglas Murray actually sums this up really well. He's like, like the bank will have all, like, do Pride Month and have all of these flags and say all of these things like that seemingly so great. But it's not like they like cancel overdraft fees or bank fees for people who are struggling financially.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to do something to help like oppressed people, that would be a great start. It's better than a flag.
Yeah. It's the least they can do.
But so they're not doing anything in any meaningful way. They're just going like, oh, here's like something we can do to just so that people will think we give a shit.
Yeah.
And an amazing amount of people have bought into that. Like, we're sort of similar ages. You remember, I came of age, a teenager in the 90s, where, in the grunge era and everything, where like selling out was like the worst thing that you could do. And everyone wanted to like obscure music. And, if you liked like the top 40 music, you were just like the most basic person ever. But now it's like, you're like the coolest, edgiest person if you're like the most mainstream. What's become mainstream? Like,
you got a brand.
Like the most punk people, like in my world right now, like the realm that I'm living in, are like middle-aged mums who are fighting against gender ideology.
That's my thing. I'm like, if you're a young married couple having kids, you're a rock star these days, because just no one does it.
Yeah, it's like, it's just. I mean, cultures change, and all different like zeitgeists happen, and all different fads. So this will all roll into something new again. As I said, it's just this one's just so particularly dangerous, and that laws have already been changed. Like, if we were dealing with that, no laws had been changed, and this group of people were actually protesting and going out there like trying to change laws in their favor, it would be quite different. Because we'd be able to then have public conversations about like, okay, how should these laws be changed? Because if there was basically everyone was saying, look, okay, we have to cater to this. We need a third in all like government and public buildings. We need a third unisex bathroom. These people, if for their identification documents, they want to be able to put trans on there. But okay, it's your document. Yeah. Putting trans on there doesn't fit me in any way. Doesn't fit anyone else.
Yeah.
And space makes sense to me. Cool. We'd be able to have great conversations about this. We're not having those conversations because the laws were changed in stealth.
Yeah, trans sports leagues. Trans can compete against trans. Yeah. I mean, who's got a problem with that?
I didn't know this actually until I got involved in all of this. The men's sports actually isn't men's sports. It is an open category. It's only female that is female sports.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing. That is the crazy thing. And it's like, and you want to talk about years when like women have started to compete and started like, it is like it's yesterday, you know.
It's so insane. But like, there's a reason why no woman has been in the open category.
Yeah.
It's not because she's not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
You know, like, I just think of if men had just been able to participate in women's sports for the last 25 years, we wouldn't have Serena Williams.
Yeah, of course.
That career wouldn't have existed.
No, I mean, if she competes in like a college level men, she'd be ranked like 600 and, something.
Well, she did, because early on in her career, she had said that she could beat men. And so there was a guy that was like ranked like 200 on the world tour, and he played her and he beat her like 6-1, 6-love.
Yeah.
And so she realized that actually, no, and she's still one, I would argue, is actually still the greatest player ever. It's just men are different.
Yeah. And
she has since said, she doesn't say it anymore, but like 10 years ago, she did an interview and she said men and women's tennis is like different sports.
Yeah.
Men are faster, they're stronger. It's a fact. We don't love the fact.
Yeah.
It just is. Like, we've got to play the cards we're dealt here.
I think sports is one of the most important arenas for this. Because I think, for one thing, you have this idea of what's fair, and you also have this idea of biological differences, and it's as clear as day when you actually watch it. But I think also it's a combination of all of that, where people love watching sports, and I'm not a big sports person. It took someone actually explain this to me. But it's this idea of like, so much of people's days and weeks is a routine. They can predict what it is. They can kind of see what's coming. When you sit down to watch a footy game, you don't know what the results are going to be.
Yeah.
That's exciting. That's exciting, that idea of that electricity of like, we're watching something happening in real time and it's unpredictable.
And it's still the one area where there's like, Bill Maher actually did a thing on this recently. Like, there's no Nepo babies in sport. Like, you can only get there by being the best.
Yeah.
So you are just watching people who are like so dedicated and naturally talented. Like, it's a great thing to watch the best of human beings do something. It is entertaining, and just the unpredictability of it all. But I just started laughing just before, because I'm just thinking like the big story at the moment is the guy thinks he's a woman ballerina. Ugh. I don't know if you've seen this on Twitter in the last 24 hours. You can only this is just so horrible.
Did you post that? Did you post it on Twitter where you're like, who's going to lift him?
No, I haven't, because I've just been watching it all, just going like, I don't even know what to say about this.
Yeah, someone replied on there like, who's going to be lifting
I did say that. I did say like,
I
did say like, which one's going to be lifting this shit house? But like, it's just like two things. One, apparently he said like, one of the ways he knew he was a woman is because he wanted to be a ballerina. There's no male ballerinas, and you're like, yes, there are.
There's a movie.
But when you go and watch the ballet, like, the men lift the women. Like, there are male ballerinas, and it's totally different from the women ballerinas.
Was it like Billy Elliot was a big film?
Yeah, of course. Like, this is so stupid. Like, that also, like, ballet is just, it's not, in a way, it's not even like a thing, to be praised in a sense, because, what women go through to be good at it. I mean, it is like destroys their bodies, mental health, everything. I mean, they're eating disorders and everything. To be able to have the body to be a ballerina, it is just brutal.
Yeah.
And then this guy is just standing on his tippy toes and not well.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's so ridiculous. And then even like, just to bring it back home, I question this with Peter Fitzsimons, the former Wallabies player turned like Sydney Morning Herald
pirate.
I question him with this all the time, and he's never once responded to me. And he'll respond, like, he'll be on Twitter and he'll respond to everyone else, but he won't respond to me. But to his credit, he hasn't blocked me yet. But he's big on, trans women in sport, like, for inclusion. And I'm always like, cool. So why aren't you campaigning for trans men to be in the Wallabies?
Mm.
There's two reasons. One, they die.
Yeah.
And two, he knows it would not be entertaining to watch.
Yeah.
It would destroy the team, because the men wouldn't, to be able to have a female on that field, the men would not be able to play at full capacity. They'd have to play at 50% capacity.
Yeah, well,
for
they
it to be in
die.
any way. Yeah, they would die. You break a neck.
Yeah.
So, because I actually rugby union is the sport that I love to watch, and I love to watch women's rugby as well because they're so amazing. They're so incredibly strong and fast and just brilliant. And like the Women's World Cup that was on, like the New Zealand team, they're brilliant. They're fantastic. They couldn't play in the All Blacks.
No. Yeah.
And it doesn't mean they're worse. It just means they're different.
Yeah.
And so it shouldn't be controversial to say this sort of stuff.
No.
But it is.
No, I always, even in the interactions I have on Twitter, it's always this thing of, you start with sports and you kind of like move down the different areas and eventually you end up at female prisons.
Yeah.
And there's no real, every time the best I ever get is, well, it's a case by case, And even then it's like, okay, but you're then acknowledging that you're deciding at that point in time,
Exactly, you bigot.
Exactly, yeah.
That's the thing with gender ideology. At any point, you just pull a thread of it and the whole thing falls apart. It is just full of contradictions. It's like it's designed to make you feel like you're going crazy. Gender ideology allows male rapists in women's prisons because they say they're women. You'd think that would be the end of it. It's not.
Yeah.
There's a male rapist or male sex offender. He's an attempted rapist in a Victorian women's prison right now. There's actually lots, but this was sort of the one that we had an opportunity because he was named or like the case was known. And so it was one that we could really try and get him moved and sort of get stuff happening with it. The Victorian MP, Harriet Singh, she blocked me on Twitter after I'd emailed her about it. Ro Allen, who is the commissioner of the Victorian Equal Opportunities and Human Rights Commission, was just like, this is just not our responsibility. It's like, well, then what the fuck is?
Yeah.
It's like, the Australian, I also contacted the Australian Human Rights Commission. They can't do anything. And I'm like, weird, because for apps, you seem to be able to do stuff, but what male sex offenders in women's prisons, like suddenly, couldn't possibly go after that.
Yeah.
Of course they could. They don't want to. But then you go and you look into who works in these institutions, and a lot of them have gender identities. And so then you just go, well, you're dealing with lots of people who, to have their own identity validated and their own this absolute delusion validated, the price they're willing to pay is male sex offenders in women's prisons.
Yeah.
I think that's abhorrent.
Yeah, I like it to this kind of runaway train where if you're on board, with the trans activism, it's the only thing that's right. So anything in its way has to be wrong and needs to be removed.
Yeah, well,
and there's no station that'll stop at.
When you see people who have newly peeked into what's going on, and you see them trying to, play both sides. I did it. It's all part of the journey. You go like, there's got to be common ground here, and they're trying to find it until we will eventually realize, no.
Yeah.
There is nothing in the middle here.
No, it's reality. It's literally a question of reality.
Yeah. Because like for me, obviously I come at this from for female only spaces perspective, and I try and stay in my lane with that as much as possible. So I don't always comment on sports things or the kids things and stuff like that, even though I'm watching and reading it every day. It's just, I'm not an expert on that, but like I am an expert on female only spaces. I've seen how many men on a daily basis try to access one. It was my job to watch it.
Yeah.
But my actual bottom line with it is just truth.
Yeah.
So even if you had like every man who claims to be a woman, if every single one of them was just like the most perfect, like stereotypical gentleman, which would be ironic, but you know what I mean? It's like a really lovely.
It's the complete opposite.
Just the loveliest lady. But just even if they were just the safest, loveliest person, would never ever dream of doing harm to a woman. Basically what I thought we were dealing with.
Yeah.
Just say that was the case. I actually would still have a problem with it. Because it's truth. Truth matters too much. They're not women. Can't force people to believe them. You can't force how people think. When I think back to 2009, 2010, when I would have conversations with transsexual men in a bar, not one of them ever tried to tell me that he was an actual woman.
Sure.
So of course we got along because we were just talking as two human beings.
Yeah.
The moment someone tells me that I have to believe this lie or I'm a bigot, no.
Yeah.
I won't do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I would much prefer not have to go to court and all of this stuff, but in doing so, I much prefer being on the side that doesn't have to prove that men are women.
Yeah.
That's quite a challenge.
Well, there is a distinction between being right and being true. Right changes. Yes. True is true.
Yeah. True is just true.
And you see that. You see that struggle with someone where they don't want to be called a transphobe. They want to be on the tolerant side. But you can see it inside when they talk to them, and there's that struggle. The
tolerant side is our side. We are the tolerant ones.
Yeah.
I can't fathom what they've been told, what we actually think. I mean, obviously, there's we want genocide, which someone brought this to my attention recently, and I find this rather amusing. One of the things on like the genocide checklist to see if a genocide is happening, one of them is like the sterilization of the population. They're sterilizing themselves.
Yeah. Move past that one.
They're doing the genocide.
Move past that one quickly, yeah.
Like, just no, I do not want... my things, I don't want harm on any of these people.
Yeah.
It's the whole point.
Yeah.
It's just so crazy. It's just such a mess. And I just think, especially in Australia, it's so captured. Our governments, our institutions, it's so captured. It's going to feel worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
So I've been plugged into this for a little while. And so right now, watching people wake up and seeing, like how all the Nazi stuff played out and everything, it felt very traumatically worse for a bit there. But then you start watching people go, hang on, that's not true, is it? And what else isn't true? And it's slowly happening. It moves slowly, but surely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really, really optimistic about it all, because I just think at the end of the day, you cannot get 8 billion people to believe that men are women.
Yeah.
Not democratically anyway. And so you're always going to have a fight back with that, and the truth will win. It just sort of always does. Even if you've got to go and really fight for it. It just, I would definitely I'm happier to be fighting for truth than I would be if I was having to fight for ideology. That would be scarier to me. I wouldn't do it.
And so God forbid, but what happens if you do lose? And you're found guilty of a crime against humanity?
No, it's not a criminal case. I mean, you lose, and women's rights are in a really, really, really precarious point in Australia. It wouldn't be over for women's rights. I mean, you'd just keep on fighting, and you'd get there eventually, but it would be a huge blow. Yeah. So I just don't think of it in those terms. I just go like, either the law is built on evidence and truth, or it's not.
Yeah. I tell you what, though, it's hard, though, when you see the trans flag flying outside of Victorian Parliament,
Yeah, I mean, that's just political optics, isn't it? And I think stupid political optics. I mean, things have a life, like fads have a lifespan. And if you've gone all in on a fad, especially one like this, I don't know. I just think, when it inevitably all comes crashing down, I just wouldn't want to be the person who flew a trans flag outside of Parliament while children were being sterilized.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think some people will go down with the ship. Like they'll be like the band playing while Titanic sinks because they have to.
Yeah.
How do you own up? Like as I said, the women's rights thing, we'll get that back. It's going to be a fight. It's going to be painful, and it could take a really long time, and it's expensive and all of that. It's horrible to do it, but we can get it back. But people who have been like sterilized and had mutilated with surgery and brutalized with surgery, you can't get that back. It's irreversible.
Yeah. I think
So-
that's those court cases are those kids, the generation of kids that are going to grow up and realize
It's going to be terrifying.
they're sterile, and they were just like, you're my parents, you're meant to take care of me.
And I think a lot about it, because say I can see how when like you're a teenager you think like, oh, even being sterilized, like I'm not going to become one of those basic people who has a kid anyway. I was sure I would never have a kid. I was so vocal about it. I said, like, when I was like 19, I was like, oh, I'd have a hysterectomy if someone would give me one. It wasn't until I turned 36 that I was like, oh, something's missing.
That's that biology again. It goes back to the biology is real.
I love my work. I love what I do. I love my life, everything about it. But I was just like, there's got to be more than this.
Yeah.
I needed more than work. I was like, I want to have like a baby. Well, not just a baby, but like obviously a child and that grows up to be a fully formed adult. She's not going to be a baby forever. But I wanted like family and have some other reason to work. All of that. Just that I wasn't, this center of my own universe anymore. There was just so many things. I went, oh, yeah, this isn't like not having kids isn't, I don't think actually all it's cracked up to be.
It's terrifying, but it's also the greatest thing ever. And, don't worry about it. You don't own a home. We don't have money, like, but we'll figure it out. Babies don't cost any money,
But no, literally, it wasn't like I like waited till like the perfect time in my life to have a baby or anything. I was just like, no, now's when I want one. You just make it work.
Yeah.
It just works. Like,
yeah.
She's fine. She's fed. She's dry. She's healthy. She has all of her toys.
Yeah.
She's loved, and we have fun with it every day. Like we do all sorts of fun things. Like, actually, life becomes really quite simple.
Yeah.
Like, I remember actually when I was pregnant, I was and I'm sure that your wife did the same thing. You're reading everything, and one thing quickly learned that I could only read blogs that were like written prior to 2017, because after that they all said like pregnant person and all that crap. And I was like, hopefully there's been no huge advancements from 2016 to now, so I'm going to miss out on them. But anyway, but I was reading stuff and, do this with the baby, blah, 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 blah. And I got to the point where I was like, I think they're overthinking this.
Yeah.
Like my nana did this on a farm with no electricity.
Yeah.
Everyone survived. Like, surely it's fine. And the only piece of advice so I stopped reading it basically. I just was like, I'm going to just sort of wing it a bit. And if there's stuff I'm not sure of, then I'll go and research. The one piece of advice I read that just has always stuck to me, and I think it always will, was have your baby, get to know its personality, and then treat it accordingly. Don't try and fit the square into a circle. And I think that actually just sums up everything in what we're going through right now. Like just embrace who you are as a person, be treated accordingly as just who you actually are, not this like fake label of who you want to be, just who you actually are.
Yeah.
And if you're a man, you're not actually a woman.
Yeah.
And if that breaks your heart, like, I'm really sorry, but you're not. And I think it shouldn't take some like woman with an app to break that news to you.
Yeah.
That is really a doctor's responsibility.
Yeah.
Not mine.
Now you should plug how people can help.
Yes, so we have, so it's eaglecrowdfund.com. So we built our own crowdfunding site. The irony is that we would probably get kicked off other crowdfund sites because they don't take too kindly to people who challenge the current zeitgeist. And I've been kicked off Kickstarter, for example. I'm banned from Kickstarter. We were doing that for the company at one point and couldn't anymore. And so we were just like, instead of going through the stress of getting kicked off a crowdfunding site to raise money to defend ourselves against a male who got kicked off a female app, we're like, we've got the resources, we'll just like build our own. So we're building the new platform right now. And so it was basically like just pens down on that for, I was told 4 days, it turned up taking a month because that's how it works in developer land. They have no concept of time. But anyway, so we launched it last week. We've had an amazing response so far. So if it goes through to through the federal court, this will cost us $500,000.
Wow.
So we are 5 days in and we've raised $65,000 so far.
Okay.
So very, very happy and excited about that.
What's the timeline?
Because it's our own, we don't have like that, sort of GoFundMe timeline type thing.
Okay.
So the timeline is until we, it's done.
Yeah.
If it ends up going to the High Court, it will be between $750,000 and $1 million.
Yeah.
To get women put back in the Sex Discrimination Act. Yeah. So unfortunately, we can't bill it to the Gillard government who took it out. But yeah.
You got to get J.K. Rowling. That's money in a couch. You got to.
It is, isn't it? Like you just go like how, like, just all these like hardworking people that have to pay money to fund this. Again, it's something that we shouldn't even have to be fighting, but here we are. We do, and yeah. Some days I'm like angry that the government went and did this, didn't think through how it was all going to be, and don't just go. Actually, yes, sorry, we should just go and fix that.
Yeah.
Because obviously, women should be defined as a clear sex class, and of course, you should be able to have female-only spaces. It shouldn't even be a fight, but it is, and it could be $1 million fight. So, yeah, that's probably one of the stressful parts of it.
I mean, you were a screenwriter for a long time. Do you sometimes feel like you're in a film? That somehow this has kind of fallen to you in some way, this fight?
There's so many times. So when you're a screenwriter, like you sell a script and blah, 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 and then you've got like creative execs and producers, not writers, basically always giving you notes on the story to try and make it better. Never does. But anyway. And, you'd write things and they'd be like, and sometimes you'd write something that's really bad and they'd be like, it's too obvious. No one will buy that. It wouldn't happen. And it's so many times in this whole thing, I just go, if I tried to submit this as a story, people would go like, it's just not believable. No one's going to buy this. Yeah. Like something else. Like no one is going to believe that people think that men are actually women. You're going to have a better premise for your story. Yeah, people do. They buy it.
Yeah.
Or at least they claim to. I don't think that anyone actually genuinely believes it. I think a lot of people just do it out of fear or financial gain.
Yeah.
There's some power in it. And then for the other people, there's not power in it. There's a lot of fear. I don't think anyone's sitting there going like, oh my God, my entire life I've thought men are women and I can finally reveal that truth. I'm comfortable now that I can say it. No.
That is the crazy thing though. That is the war that we're fighting to say, make your story into a film, and whether you're the good person or the bad person, whether you're the antagonist or the protagonist.
Yeah, it depends whose story you're telling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. To some people, I'm like the big bad woman who wanted her own rights. How dare she? But yeah, like I'll wear the badge proudly. I do want women to have rights. Nothing will stop me from making sure that my daughter does not have to share her change rooms or sport with men.
Yeah. It's a pretty clear fight when you kind of put in those terms.
Yeah, it's pretty basic stuff. And yeah, look, if we just sit around waiting or trying to get politicians to do stuff, I think we could die waiting because they're cowards and they won't do anything. So, we have to do stuff like this. And that being said, I sort of contradict myself in a sense because I say like, I don't think that this problem will be solved in politics, and I don't think it will. However, I am going to run against Shannon Fentiman, the Queensland Attorney General, who brought in the self-ID laws. She's also the Minister for Women.
She blocked you, right? Didn't she block you from you were trying?
She blocked my email, yeah. She actually also hid a comment on Facebook. I've replied to her Facebook twice, and from 2 times doing that, I went onto Facebook the other day, and I very rarely use Facebook, but it had like, you've been awarded the top fan of Shannon Fentiman. I was like, oh, that's pretty funny. And it was like, do you accept it? And I'm like, oh, yes, I do. Anyway, then she'd done this post about how, they were doing this stuff for, wanted to do things for domestic violence and stuff like that. I can't remember exactly what it was, but that's the general gist. And I just wrote underneath it and I said, well, not allowing men to self-ID as women and therefore be able to go into domestic violence shelters is probably a good step in the right direction. He hid the comment.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, does she think I'm stupid? I mean, I obviously took a screenshot of my comment as soon as I wrote it, just in anticipation that something nefarious would happen, and it did.
Yeah.
It's really, really eerie, creepy behavior. But so, yeah, I'm going to run against her. The goal of having her answer what a woman is and making people in Queensland realize what has been going on really behind their backs. And that I sort of think if someone will do something like this as stealthily as possible, what else are they doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, to use politics to get people to realize what's actually going on is a good thing to do. But I don't actually think, politicians themselves are going to change anything, not anytime soon in this country. We've got a whole, other than Tasmania, which is completely captured, we've got a whole Labor-run country. There is absolutely no reason for them to go and do anything to help women right now.
Yeah.
So, and you'd think that the Liberal Party would go, oh, wow, there's like a clear winning strategy here. Just go and be like sort of the anti-woke, pro-women's rights party. And they just seem to be sprinting in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
It's just...
I mean, just add it to the list,
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, no, I'm not a fan of any political party. I don't really care at this point. I think they're all corrupt. I don't agree with any of... I don't agree with each of them in equal measure on certain issues. Like there's some where I'm like, oh, I prefer that policy, and there's some, the other, I prefer that policy, whatever. But yeah, I just think if someone, there's no political party that goes, oh, hang on, wait, 50% of the population, maybe we should help them out. No.
Wow. Okay, well, that's exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. Like I'm excited.
That's a whole other. That's the sequel, I guess. That's not the sequel. It's the epilogue, the end credit. After you win.
Yeah.
Yes.
It'll be a fun party. One of the things people don't seem to know this, but all of the TERFs in Australia, they're all big drinkers, and so when we get together, it's all very, very fun and wild. So it'll be a huge party when we win.
All right. Well, it was great chatting.
Thank you so much. It's been great.
Maybe we can talk in a little bit later. Then we can check in with how your case is going.
Yeah. There'll be updates. Throughout the year. No, just the goal is to make as many people as possible in the country aware of what's going on, that it's not like just a group of women being hysterical. We actually are fighting for something really real, and we've got every reason to be as hysterical as we are.